Okay, now I want to.
Last night that about how does the student know what we're talking about? This was a separate question from how does the student know which role? This was how do they know what we're talking about in general? And the answer to that is you use pictures and props and you act things out and you use things that are familiar to your student already. And you teach them, and we're going to start out tonight about teaching vocabulary, but that's a big part of it. You teach them basic vocabulary with actual items when you can and pictures of things, and you put those things into sentences so that they learn to speak the language in sentences and not just 1 and 2 word phrases. So I guess hopefully that helps make that more clear. It's not as hard as it seems. It's amazing what you can do with acting out and pointing and things like that. My main ESL experience is from adopting 3 children between the ages of 5 and 8 from Korea who didn't speak any English. And, you know, they come in on the plane and you deal with it. and you do a lot of with them, you know, take by the hand and lead around, but a lot of pointing, showing, and you do the same thing with an adult, except, you know, on an adult level. So hopefully that's more helpful explanation than we gave last night. So we are going to start off as soon as I get my thing together here. Going to start off with vocabulary. Hi, Ursula. And I'm going to share the slides. Okay. And okay, I'm first, aren't I? Okay, vocabulary is the collection of words we know the meaning of when we hear, say, read, and write them. The words we use to both receive information and to express ourselves. Vocabulary instruction for beginning ESL students starts with listening and speaking using oral vocabulary. And of course, reading and writing uses print vocabulary. These are the things we'll cover in our discussion on vocabulary. We'll walk through vocabulary lessons from both Ventures and Challenger, the same series we showed you last night, using the teacher's manuals and student books. As we noted when we discussed lesson plans, the teacher's manual is organized around the warm-up, the presentation, which is the actual instruction part, the practice, and comprehension check. The lessons we're showing come directly from the Ventures Teachers Edition. Every unit begins with a picture and a vocabulary list. This list makes it easier to find out what your student knows by establishing a baseline of words. So the first step is the warm-up, and you can ask the student, what do you see? Make a mental note or write down some of the sounds they might have difficulty pronouncing or the words that they struggle with, things like that. The second step is the presentation. Always model the behavior you want to see from your student. Use the gestures we showed you last night in the conversation topic. At this level, we can't solely rely on language to tell students what we want them to know. So in this case, we're presenting vocabulary. I'm going to model what a teacher does to present the vocabulary. And so watch what I do so you can repeat it later yourself. Okay, so I'm going to start out. Listen. Country. 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 And hopefully you would answer country when I give you the repeat gesture. And hopefully you could see my cursor, my pointer. I was underlining the word and then pointing to it in the picture. So let's do another one. ID card, ID card, ID card. Hopefully you would have said ID card. The third step is to practice. Give students an opportunity to practice what they've learned. Point and repeat as needed, but not too much. Don't overdo it. Don't just do it until they're sick of it. If they're having trouble with it, skip it for the moment and return throughout the lesson. Just keep going back here and there to, point and do it again. The fourth step is the comprehension check. After the material is presented, you can practice with yes/no questions. For example, I could point to the ID card and say, is this an ID card? And they can say yes, or give me a thumbs up or nod, some affirmation that yes, it is. Depending upon the success of the comprehension check, you can revisit the presentation and practice. You can also use the QR code up here. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Finally, to expand the lesson wider or deeper, you can follow up with an expansion activity that's related to the lesson. So you might ask something like, where are you from? Or what country are you from? Since the lesson was talking about countries. That's related to the lesson. It's depending on whether your student is would be able to understand it or not. You get a feel for that. Okay. You may decide your student would benefit from repeating the lesson independently. This is where the QR code comes in. You and your student can download an app for linking to the QR codes that you will see in Ventures. This is one of the big features of Ventures, is the QR codes. And they're in both the teacher and student editions. Show your student how to use these study aids. The QR codes provide audio so the student can listen to the lessons on their own. Now, if you have your phone there, you should be able to scan this code from the slide. If you have your phone handy, give it a try and see what happens. And let me know, give me a thumbs up if you were able to access it. Yep. Okay. See, Mary got it. Hopefully, I can't see many of you, but hopefully a lot of you were able to. Okay. So those are really, this is a really neat feature of this book. They can take their book and have it talk to them so when you're not there. All right, so let's practice. Do a practice lesson with some of you hopefully volunteering to be the teacher, doing what I just did on the 2 slides ago. Remember, you can unmute yourself by holding the space bar down if you don't want to click the little button. This lesson is from the ESL High beginner level. So it's a lot more advanced than the first one I showed you. So the first thing the teacher would want to do is find out what your student knows by asking questions. So who would like to ask some exploratory questions, such as what do you see? What else could you ask? Anybody? Remember, you could be pointing at something. For instance, if I pointed here, what could I ask about that?
What is the man holding?
Okay. That's a good one. Depending on your student, I would think at this level, they could answer that. If you wanted to make it simpler, it could just be, is this a man? Right? So, yes, no questions are really good to start with, but if they're advanced enough, yeah, that would be a good question. You could ask, if I pointed down here, what might I ask? Any ideas?
Is this an advanced enough level where you would ask, like, what are they doing?
Yes.
Or what's, okay.
Yes, I would think so. At this level, they should be able to answer that question. So that's very good. I mean, you could ask a lot of things about this. You could ask about colors. Yeah, there are many, many possibilities in this picture. Okay, so who would like to be brave and present a vocabulary word like I did earlier? Vocabulary words are kind of hard to, it's fuzzy up here. I know the picture's not very clear. The words are long brown hair, straight hair, jogging suit, curly blonde hair, short hair, lots of hair in here, a red shirt and a striped skirt. Anybody like to?
Belinda or Susan, I can't, your camera isn't on, so I can't see you, but if you want to, just press your space bar and say, I'll do it. Otherwise, you could raise your hand and say, I'm interested. Any volunteers?
I'll do it.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I think what you're asking for, okay, I'll say straight hair. And then
Okay. Right.
And then I point to one of the women that has straight hair. And
Okay.
say straight hair.
Okay, now, and you would have first given
Oh
your
yeah,
gesture.
I didn't do all the signals, right? Okay. I was
Right.
trying to-
Right.
One thing at a time here, right? Okay,
Right.
so,
Right. Good.
okay, point, straight hair. And then I point to the picture, straight hair.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then I gesture her to repeat.
Straight hair. Yep. Good. Good job. Okay, so,
What would be a comprehension check?
well, we're going to get to that.
Oh, okay.
We haven't gotten to that part yet. This was the teaching the presentation part.
Okay.
So the gestures will get easier as you go along. You'll get used to doing them. And you'll find you don't need the stop gesture particularly. You really just need, usually you just need the listen one and the repeat one. So, okay, so that was a good job. So let's pretend we've all practiced and we'll move on to the comprehension check. What might a tutor ask as questions for the comprehension? Remember, yes, no questions. So what might you ask about things in this picture that would require a yes, no answer?
Are there any men?
Okay, yes. How about you could say something like, is the man in the blue jogging suit running? No, he's not jogging. So the answer to that would be no. So you want some things to be no answers too. You don't want them all to be yes. can you think of anything else? Like earlier, one of you said, what's the man holding? That would be an appropriate question here. Or what is he eating? Let's see, you could say, does this man have short hair? Or this man?
Could we ask a question to say, do you see two people in blue or wearing blue?
Yes,
Good.
yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
What about,
Okay.
do you see people fighting?
Okay. And that would be a no question. Okay. All right, so there's a lot going on in this picture. So you can probably think of questions. And then finally, what might an expansion activity be? And actually you hit on some things that might perhaps fit in the expansion activity part, because they would be a little bit more advanced than the yes, no question. Somebody said something about people wearing blue, I think. So how many people are wearing blue? All right, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 people with blue on. The question, this thing I said earlier about what is the man eating, that would actually belong in the expansion activity, because that wasn't a yes, no question. So you could talk about what people are carrying, or what's for sale in the stores. You know, in the expansion activity, you can go a lot broader into what's in the picture if the student has the language to do that. And at this level, they should be able to talk about things in this picture. Okay, any questions about that? Is that clear as mud? Just remember that, you know, we did the warm up just by asking them what they saw, and then we presented the vocabulary, then we did some practice with the comprehension with yes, no, and then we asked broader questions. So it's really not all that complex. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Challenger series, which, if you remember, is the one that most of our basic tutors use, our basic learner tutors use. Every Challenger lesson opens with a word list that is centered around a phonics trait, such as a consonant blend or vowel combinations. In this case, the silent letters are the focus. So after the phonics principle is introduced, the lesson then presents a story-specific vocabulary, a reading selection, a comprehension activity, a word study, and writing. And that's the pattern for every chapter. Main characters are introduced in the first lesson, and they're brought back into stories throughout the book. This format supports students who are not comfortable with new or unfamiliar patterns and situations, and that's true of many of our basic literacy students. They like to know what's going to happen. They like to know that there won't be any surprises thrown at them. This is a page, actually it's a couple pages from the level 1. The words to study, this is the vocabulary that the student needs to know in order to comprehend the reading. Always, always pre-teach the vocabulary. And what does that mean, to pre-teach? Well, here's how I would pre-teach a vocab list like this to a basic literacy student. First, I would ask the student to read the words for study aloud without asking about their meanings. Note in your own mind what letter combinations the student has problems sounding out, because you can go back to that later and work on it. Then I would ask the student to point out words with various characteristics, such as which words have double letters, which words have a short I sound, which words have silent letters. This is all so that you can help and make sure that if there's a gap in the student's knowledge, you're kind of try and pin that down. I'd also ask the student to point out plural words. And maybe for a more advanced student, if they could point out the root words and suffixes. For example, the ed endings on turned and waited. Then, only then, finally, would I ask the student about the definition. If they can't tell what the word means, or if they can't give you a synonym, but they can use it correctly in a sentence, then I would accept that. If not, explain the word using images as much as possible, or physical activities by acting it out. It helps the student to make associations for recalling the world later if there's some activity or motion associated with it. A picture dictionary also comes in handy here. So pre-teaching can take a while, but it's worth every minute because it prepares the students for a successful reading experience. So after pre-teaching the vocabulary, you still don't start reading. You talk about the photo. This is going to help you understand how much prior knowledge the student has about this subject, and it establishes a context for reading. Notice that at level 1, the sentences are very short and the paragraphs are very short. So you've done the vocabulary, you've done the reading, and now you're going to do a little bit of comprehension. This comprehension activity asks the students to figure out which word is appropriate to put in a particular blank. The main focus is to check to see if the student has understood the story. But secondarily, it's to see if the student recognizes parts of speech by their position in the sentence. We will talk more about how these lessons integrate grammar later on in the workshop. Also, note that the words in the activities here in the boxes reinforce the phonics principle of the silent letter. Also note that the last question may spiral back to the previous lesson's phonics, which happens to be the letter combination AY. Each lesson has a word study activity, such as making plurals or adding ED to words or identifying opposites. This example checks the student's general vocabulary by asking the student to group words that are related. The lesson ends then with a writing activity aimed at making the reading selection more relevant to the student. Challenger provides online enrichment activity activities such as puzzles and games. Ventures has a collaborative worksheet collection and an arcade for interactive activities that's very mobile friendly. It's easy for students to download these activities on their phones. One caveat though, keep in mind that homework and additional activities can be very difficult for students to make time for, but provide additional opportunities for learning anyway. Just make sure the student understands what is expected and what is extra. Any questions or comments on how these curricula handle vocabulary? Going once, going twice? Okay, great.
All right. Let me get myself organized for the next one here.
Okay. Was there anything in the chat? Let's see, I missed that. No, okay.
I'll get my next set of notes up here.
Mhm.
And the top. Okay, so here we go again. Share these slides. All right. I think we're ready to go. Sarah, you ready?
Yep. So, pronunciation. Pronunciation is important, and it can be difficult to teach. I assure you, it is difficult to teach, but I think it's even harder for our students to learn. You should make it a part of your ESL lessons each and every time. During any lesson, you'll see which words your student has trouble pronouncing, and you can work on those. After we introduce some principles for teaching pronunciation, we'll look how to practice making and describing English sounds, and we'll show you a process for teaching these sounds. Then we'll suggest activities you can do with your student to improve their pronunciation. The first thing you need to note is that a student's native language, influences how they speak and even how they hear English. Our brains train themselves to distinguish the speech sounds that are familiar to us. Some sounds may be new to them. Speaking English requires different tongue and lip placement and different mouth movements than ESL's students are used to. Even native English speakers may have trouble distinguishing between sounds, and this can interfere with reading and spelling. There are three major reasons students have problems with individual sounds. The first is that the sound is new to the student. They've never heard this sound before. For example, because French has no sound for TH. A French speaker may learning to say thank in English may say sank or tank instead. The second reason the student may have trouble is that the sound exists in the student's native language, but in English it comes in a place that is strange to them. For example, the Khmer language has the s sound, but not at the end of a word. So a Cambodian learning English will tend to drop final s sounds. They might pronounce bus as ba and peace as p. Third, the sound might not exist at all in the student's native language, but it might be similar to one that does. For example, a Spanish speaker learning English might have difficulty distinguishing between the vowel sounds in the words bit and beat. The Spanish sound system has the long E sound, but not the short I sound. So Spanish speakers tend to pronounce both these words just the same. It's a good idea to do a bit of research on the native language of your student. Compare their alphabet to the English alphabet. Compare the sounds of their language to the sounds of English. Google Translate is a great place to do this. The Tutor Information Book has more language-specific information also for your reference. The second principle of pronunciation instruction is that adult second language learners don't usually just pick up good pronunciation. The older students are, and the longer they've been speaking their native languages, the more training their ears and mouths have had in hearing and speaking non-English sounds. They need direct, explicit instruction in English pronunciation, in its sounds, its rhythm, its intonation, and then they need lots and lots of practice. Listen carefully to how your student makes sounds and model English sounds for them. This can be stressful for your student, so practice these new sounds in small chunks.
There are several types of sounds. Voiced sounds are made using your vocal cords, while unvoiced sounds are made with your breath. Nasal sounds come through your nose. Continuants are sounds that you can make as long as you have breath, but stop sounds cannot be held and are gone as soon as you make them. Recognizing these differences can help you teach the student how to make sounds and can also help you to choose practice words to improve pronunciation. The text in the box up at the top right corner shows how you may see letters and sounds represented in your textbooks. Letters between slashes represent the sound of the letter, and letters without the slashes represent the name of the letter. Before we teach students to make the sounds of English, we need to be sure that we can make the sounds correctly ourselves. It helps to break the process into 4 steps. First, you get your mouth in the correct position. Second, you produce the sound. Third, you stop the sound. And fourth, you relax your mouth position. If you reverse the third and fourth steps, the stopping and relaxing steps, you'll get an unwanted vowel sound, added to your consonants. For example, if I make the sound for V, which is, and if I relax my mouth and open my mouth before I stop making the sound, I'm going to be saying "v." So this is how it would sound. And I didn't say on purpose. It just happened because I opened my mouth. Try that. Try that for yourself along with me. And we don't say Valentine. So we don't want to say V for that V sound. We want to just say V. So you stop the sound before you move your mouth. So this getting the mouth in position to start with is kind of an important piece. So in teaching sounds, we use a variation of the explicit instruction model. The explain and model steps are combined, and we have two types of guided practice, both listening and speaking. For example, to teach the sound for L, I would explain that I first touch the tip of my tongue to the roof of my mouth, just behind my upper teeth, and I keep it there throughout the sound. So the air comes out kind of around my tongue, and I use my vocal cords to make the sound. So it sounds like ooh, ooh, ooh. Try that. Put your tongue up there first and don't move it. Ooh. Okay. And that's a really interesting one, because if you don't put your tongue there first, you're going to say oh. If you say the sound oh, you'll find that your tongue is down, it's not up on the roof of your mouth. Oh, and you don't put your tongue up till part way through, and that's when you actually get the L sound. So to avoid having that sound on the front of the L, you put your tongue up there first. Ooh. Okay. So now we're going to practice the sounds in the box on this slide, because these are, well, 3 of them are difficult. 1 of them isn't. Like 2 of them are difficult. 2 of them aren't so hard. But be careful not to add vowel sounds at the beginning or at the end of d. We don't want you saying ba and duh, because we don't say ba-erd or ba-ig. We say erd. So just think of a short word like big or dig and clip it off after the consonant sound. And don't add a vowel to the beginning of the L or the R. We don't want to say O and So again, start saying a short word like lead or red, and just cut it off before you get to the vowel. Think about what's going on in your mouth when you say these words, and you'll get how to isolate that sound, I hope. Okay, so let's make these sounds together. Let's make this one. This is d, Okay, and hopefully you could listen to yourself. And when we did this workshop in person, I could hear the mistakes. I can't hear on Zoom, because if everybody does it at once, it just all blots out. So anyway, think about this. If you taught your student that the sound for L was O, and then they tried to sound out the word in the box here, they would say illiteracy, and maybe think it was illiteracy, which totally changes the meaning of the word. So it really does matter not to stick these extra sounds on. So when preparing to teach a sound, record yourself, or simply really listen to yourself. Think about what's happening in your mouth. Think about how the sound works when you say it in a word. Remember, we don't say river, leg, or duh-ish. It can help for the tutor to exaggerate or stretch out the word as the student learns to pronounce it, pronounce the sound. For example, in Japanese, there's a sound kind of between an R and an L. So the sounds for R and L can be very challenging for Japanese speakers. One of our tutors had a Japanese student who had difficulty being understood by others when she said bleed and breathe. This was a really big problem because she's a nurse. So she needed people to understand whether she said that the student had stopped bleeding or breathing. So they practiced a lot with bleed and breathe, just to get her to feel where her tongue goes when she was making those L and R sounds. Okay. All right, we're going to do a little practice here. I'll do the first two charts. These charts show voiced and unvoiced letter pairs. And in each pair, for one of the letters, you use your vocal cords to make the sound, and for the other, you just use your breath for the unvoiced sound. Your mouth position is the same for both letters in each pair. For example, if I make the sound for V, which is V, and that's a voiced sound, and then I stop using my vocal cords in the middle of the sound, you'll hear that I'm making the sound for F. So it would sound like, try that yourself. Start with and then quit using your vocal cords. Okay, so hopefully you could tell the difference between the voiced and the unvoiced in doing that. You can help your student get the correct mouth position by watching you and then themselves in a mirror or on their cell phone or computer camera. So you can compare their mouth position with yours. You can show your student the difference between voiced and unvoiced sounds by using a piece of paper or a tissue that you can hold up, dangle in front of your mouth, and they can see the difference. If I do the sound for B, I'm going to turn sideways so you can see my paper move. And then I do. Paper really flaps with that P because that's the breath sound, and it doesn't move particularly with the B. You can also feel this if you just hold your hand in front of your mouth. So if you have a piece of paper, use that, otherwise use your hand. And I want to go through each of these pairs, and please, even though you're muted, please say the sounds along with me and practice them and think about them. So this one is Okay, hopefully you can see how that works, and being able to visually see it with the paper or feel it with your hand is helpful for the student to tell the difference. Now, those work pretty well, except for the S and the Z. You probably noticed your paper didn't move with either one of those. And that's because the air is sort of going out to the sides and down a little bit, just doesn't come forward. So to tell the difference between these, put your fingers on your voice box and do S and Z. And you'll feel the vibration with the Z, the voice sound. And then also, the other thing to try is to put your fingers in your ears and do the S and the Z sound. And the Z should have sounded like you have a bee in your head, have a buzzing noise. So that's the voice tone. You're hearing your voice in your head. People have trouble telling the difference between the sounds for W and WH. I've had people argue with me that there is no difference. There should be a difference, and it can be important for spelling. So think about the word win, W-I-N, how you say that, win, win. And then the word W-H-E-N, when, 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 when. The W sounds almost like ooh. The WH is just sort of a soft blowing sound. Okay. Yeah, then we have the nasal sounds. These aren't really that difficult as far as telling them that they're nasal, but you can often feel the vibration. Say if you make the sound for M, you can feel it vibrate through the top of your head, or through your temples. I can't feel it here, but I can feel it here. And if you wonder if the sounds are truly nasal, try this. Hold your nose and make the sound for M. Should get no sound. Okay. So your tutor information book has many other sounds and sound combinations with descriptions on how to make them. For instance, the NG sound. If I were trying to describe how to make that sound, I'd say to put the back of your tongue against the roof of your mouth and then release it. So that's how you make that sound. So sometimes you have to describe. Okay, guess that's all for that one.
Yep. So here's a summary of ways to help your student distinguish voiced, unvoiced, and nasal sounds, as we did in the previous examples. You can take a moment to review the slide. And I'm going to tell you that for those of you that were not doing COVID with masks, this is so much easier not having to do this by wearing a mask with your students. This is a godsend. Okay.
Okay, we'll move on.
Yep. Many ESL students are so frustrated with their pronunciation. They work and they work, and they may avoid talking with native English speakers because they're not confident in their ability to be understood. Respond to their frustration with plenty of encouragement and praise when they pronounce something correctly. A student's frustration builds when they speak and the other person doesn't understand. The student has just said something the only way they know how, so asking them to repeat it again and again can become embarrassing. When this happens, you can ask a follow-up question instead. Try to get the meaning without saying, "I don't understand." Then you can help your student practice saying it. And sometimes if you ask your student to write it for you, that will clear it right up. And again, we're not focused on how well they write it, just so that you can try to understand the pronunciation. Sounds aren't truly learned until they become automatic. So practice new sounds often with your student. Practice builds that confidence. Remember to practice listening as well as speaking. Students need to be able to hear the sounds and the differences between them before they can produce them. And remember also that the goal of speaking is functional communication. If your student can be understood, then they should be considered successful. Perfection isn't necessary. Make sure your student realizes this.
Vowel sounds are especially important for being understood, and they can be difficult to produce correctly. Long vowel sounds are the same as the names of the letters, but they may be difficult for ESL students to learn depending on their native language, because that language may have different sounds for the same letters or not have that sound at all. Another tricky part with long vowels is that each long vowel can be spelled in several ways. For example, the long E can be spelled as E, like in we, EE, like in feet, EA, like in week, EY, like in key, and E consonant E, like in Pete. And feet and week can both be spelled with either EE or EA, depending on the meaning. So long vowels aren't necessarily all that simple. Short vowels are the most commonly used, but many students and even tutors have a lot of trouble with the short vowel sounds. Using the keywords on the slide, if you begin saying the word and stop the sound before the consonant, you'll have the correct sound. So we have apple, ah, ed, eh, inch, I, olive, ah, up, Short vowels are further complicated when they're followed by the letter R. This changes the vowel sound. So when you have an O as in fork, OR and fork, it's pronounced or. You don't hear that O, short O sound. The A and R becomes R. The E and Bert, the I in bird, and the U in burn all become They all sound like There are about 25 different vowel sounds in English. I'm not going to go into all of them, but many of them are written with vowel combinations, such as in book, oo in boot, oi in boy and oil, aw and paw and bought. So we won't go over all of them here, but I think you'll recognize and be able to isolate these sounds, just like I just did with these sounds and these words. I read the word and Paul has awe in it. So I think all of you will be able to do that. Isolate the sounds as you encounter them with your student, and so you can help them pronounce it correctly. All right, minimal pairs. This is a teaching technique that is often used to help ASL students hear the difference between two sounds so that they can then pronounce the sounds. A minimal pair consists of two words that differ only in one sound. Minimal pairs have to do with the way the words sound, not necessarily how they're spelled. One really good way to work with minimal pairs is to ask your student to listen to two sounds or two words and tell if they are the same or different. For instance, pill, pill is the same. Pill, bill is different. But first, you have to teach the meanings of same and different. An easy way to do this is to show your student two identical objects, such as these two yellow pencils, and write the word same on a card, same. Okay, and then you show two entirely different objects like the pencil and the book, different. Okay, so we have same and different, and we even have on these little cards, I even made it so that there's a clue on each one with the little shapes up at the top in case they forget what the word says. So this is a good tool to use. You may have to show same and different objects a few times before they really catch on to it, but it shouldn't be too hard. If your student is a real beginner, it may be a lot easier for them to respond by pointing to the word and by saying same or different. So when you give the two things that are the same, they just point to the card. As your student improves their listening, you might help them to hear differences without any visual cues, such as being able to see your mouth. You could try covering your mouth as you speak, or be speaking on the phone or FaceTime or WhatsApp without the video. For instance, if I said the words man and nan, if they can see my mouth, they can tell the difference between that that M and that N. So if they've gotten pretty good at it, but they're relying on being able to see your mouth, then hiding your mouth will help them focus on the listening part. You can Google ESL minimal pairs for more examples and ideas. And then we have tense lax pairs. These are usually words with long and short vowels. And this is useful when there's no distinction between two sounds in the student's native language, such as the long E and beat, the short I and bit. And this is the one that's a big problem for Spanish speakers. Have your student watch as you say the long E and exaggerate your mouth position, and then do the short I sound, showing the more relaxed position of the mouth. There's more tension in the mouth position when saying long E. So have your student copy you, perhaps watch in a mirror or in their webcam as you make the sounds together. This helps your student to feel the difference and to compare their mouth position with yours. Now I'm going to make these sounds and watch for the difference, and then I want you to make them. So if I exaggerate it, I'll go E, beat, 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 I, bit. Okay, try that. Let's try the long E, beat, I, bit. Hopefully you could tell the difference, feel the difference in your mouth by that exaggeration, the tense and the lax part.
Okay. This next slide, this activity is one of the most fun things I think you can do when you're actually doing pronunciation with your students once they get to this point. We all say, we're gonna go someplace, don't you know? I coulda, did ya? So we use non-standard English all the time in everyday speech, and it differs very much from what we usually see in print. So as native English speakers and experienced readers, we make this connection automatically between gonna and going to. But our students really can have problems when what they hear doesn't match what they read. You'll need to help your students understand the meaning of these expressions, but trust me, once they understand it, they love it. They can't wait to say, don't you know? Or other colloquialisms. And they say it with a big, big grin on their faces. So this is a really fun exercise when you get to this point. I want you always to remember to consider your students' needs and goals when deciding how much to work on pronunciation. Let's consider these two different people. The biochemist from India may be very motivated to perfect his pronunciation as much as possible. He may be willing to devote a lot of time and effort to it because it's vital for him to be well understood by his colleagues. For him, success in pronunciation might be defined as speaking as much like a native English speaker as he can. On the other hand, we did have a student who always pronounced eggs as yegs. When she saw E-G-G-S, she knew that that was her yegs. She was a respected matriarch of her community. Everyone understood her, and she had no real need to change. Yegs was eggs, eggs was yegs. Improving pronunciation is an important goal, but be careful not to work on it so much that you frustrate your student. Remember, the goal is better communication. However, that's defined by your student. So here are 3 great websites that are good for pronunciation. We're going to look at Learning Chocolate right now. And I'm going to, there we go.
Okay, so I'm going to choose Jobs. Oh, go away.
So Learning Chocolate's excellent for students to hear how to pronounce words from their phone.
Oh,
when
what's
they're
going
in
on
class.
here?
Well, maybe we're going to, and maybe we're not, but I'm sure we will. So each topic has a lot of practical words and phrases, all with audio. And,
Okay, here we go.
Yep, there we go.
Okay, so we got appointments. And then we can click on
Insurance card. Doctor.
just an example. You know, there's audio here. There's a lot of other things, tons of things in this website for all sorts of, you know, there's vocabulary. There's many things you can do on this. That's just a real quick example, but it's a real favorite. And there's different activities so you can do matches and fill-ins and dictation up here.
The next website is a dictionary for ESL learners. This is a good one because when the student looks up the meaning of a word, the pronunciation is included. Are you demoing that one, Carolyn, or not?
No.
Okay, great. We'll just go right on. And then the third website, Color Vowel Chart, is great for listening to and learning the vowel sounds. When you have time, poke around this website and read how it can be useful. There's just a few good sites. Those are just a few sites good for pronunciation. And remember that explicit instruction with an explanation, accurate modeling, which is what you're doing, and lots of practice works best when working to improve pronunciation with your student. Remember also that communication and not necessarily perfection is the goal. Do you have any questions? What things do you think you're going to use first with your students?
Learning chocolate.
It's a good one. It's a really good one.
How
Sorry,
about questions? Any questions?
If you're working online with someone, or even if you're not, I assume if you're working with somebody in person, you have your computer with you and you're both sharing the same screen, so you're looking at it. If you're not in the same room, you both have computers, you both have to get into the same site. Is that what happens?
Well, with sharing the screen, like if you're on Zoom and you can share the screen, then they can see just like you could see.
Okay, but they wouldn't be able to operate it like.
That's true, but there is a way to give them control of the mouse to operate it. Yeah.
So I have to learn Zoom pretty well. Okay.
Well, we just found that out recently. It's sort of a new feature. And Lynn and I tried it out the other day and ended up with quite a bit of hilarity with what we were doing. It did work, yes.
So I'm assuming that we will have access to the Zoom account for the Literacy Council?
No, unfortunately.
How does that work?
You can get Zoom free. You're limited to 40 minutes at a shot.
Okay.
But you can always sign back in again immediately when you get kicked off.
Oh no, I have my own account. I wasn't sure if we had to, use the Literacy Council's Zoom account.
No, actually, it's not even available enough because the classes use the Zoom accounts, and so we can't turn it over. We've only got two Zoom accounts, and they're in almost constant use a lot of the time. So, yeah, you'd have to. And there's other options. The coordinators can guide you on different platforms you can use. You're not limited to Zoom.
Okay.
You can use FaceTime. You can use, there are other things you can use. And some people just do plain phone calls even. I mean, people are doing a lot of different things. So,
Right.
And we did say, I think that, people are starting to meet in person again, but many of the students really want to meet online because of the child care and transportation issues. And so sometimes it's a hybrid, you know, you'll meet maybe once a month and then you'll do online, you know, for the other lessons. And sometimes they can meet more frequently because it's online and not having these other problems to deal with. So, but the coordinators will help you with ways to connect with the student.
I'm meeting with my student every other time in person and then over the on the computer because it works better with her work schedule.
Yeah. Okay. If there's everybody want a 5-minute break?
Yep.
Okay. Come back at 7:36
Perfect.
and we'll continue on.
We're sitting there and all of a sudden I looked out and one of Matt's dogs was running around in my yard. We had to close the gate.
I almost forgot I needed all these props. I had to
Oh,
get things out. Okay. Let's see, more back.
well, it ended up being good that I was sitting up here because I all of a sudden looked out and one of my neighbor's dogs was running around out on the street
Uh-oh.
and it had escaped.
Oh. Get it caught?
Yeah, oh yeah, she came right willingly to me and then when I wanted her to go in, she was like, "No, that's not my plan."
Hey,
And,
we have a couple students who I don't see them. Is that a problem at all?
well, one of them said last time that it was there was some issue with,
The camera?
yeah.
At one time we had 4, but now I think we're only down to 2.
Maybe they were eating dinner.
Yeah. Dinner, what's that?
I had the dessert part already.
Do I hear birds? Has somebody got birds?
Oh, that's me.
Oh,
I'll
lucky.
mute it. I'll mute it in a minute.
No, I love bird song. I
Well,
love
I
it.
know, but it's, it won't be good once we get started.
I don't know if you all could hear my cat going off earlier. He was in there.
No.
No.
She meowing.
Oh, he plays with a toy mouse and makes the noises like he's calling kittens. And it was really loud call. Crazy. Well, time to start again,
Mhm.
but we're missing some people.
I forgot to shut the recording off. Oof, oh, well,
That's all right. At least it's not 15 or 20 minutes.
that's right. Belinda, are you back? Susan, are you back?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. So
How
I
about
think,
Emily? Anybody who doesn't have their camera on, we can't tell if you're back. Okay.
There's Ursula.
Okay. I think let's go ahead and go, Lynn. Yeah, are you ready
Okay.
to do slides?
okay.
Okay, share my screen. Grammar. Share. Okay, there you go.
Okay, grammar. What is grammar? This is going to sound weird, but when I think about what is grammar, I think about pornography. Why is that? She said. Decades ago, the Supreme Court had some really important rulings on pornography. And one of the judges says, you know, I may not be able to define pornography, but I know it when I see it. And for me, good grammar is the same way. I can't tell you exactly what it is in every case, but when I hear it, I know it. Bad grammar the same way. But that's because I'm raised in the language and you learn it slowly over time. What I'm trying to say is good grammar is an aid in effective communication. If it's wrong, but it's not interfering with communication, I say don't work it. Don't worry about it. Let it go. There's so many other elements to get in place before grammar becomes really important, and that's usually at a higher level. But you might want to think about vocabulary words as the building blocks of language, and then grammar is the glue that sticks them together. Many people, both native and non-native speakers, find grammar rules perplexing and have grown up disliking or fearing the subject. This topic is intended to show you how 2 of our instructional series takes a different approach to teaching grammar. So these are the topics that we'll cover in our discussion. Let you read that. Okay. So the grammar activities fall or focus in 5 broad areas. If your student says they lives on the block, or if you hear the girl picked up his book, or I don't have no money today, then your student is struggling with basic grammar. And these are the categories that we're dealing with: subject and verb agreement, verb tenses, pronouns, active and passive voice, and punctuation. We have in this series, and will continue to emphasize the importance of explicit instruction, especially to teach pronunciation, alphabetics, and comprehension. And when teaching strategies such as how to identify the main idea or how to make a prediction. Remember that with explicit or direct instruction, the tutor explains and models the concept, and the students practice with the tutor, and then the student will apply the concept independently. This is also known as the I do, we do, you do model, It's easier to remember for me that way. I do it, we do it together, and then you do it. The council's beginning level curriculum materials, however, generally do not teach grammar explicitly. That is, they do not teach grammar rules using direct instruction in the style of the 1970s grammar books. Rather, proper grammar usage is demonstrated through the dialogues, the conversations, and the readings, and then reinforced with practice. This integrated approach mimics the way that young children learn to speak grammatically naturally. The idea is that new speakers will recognize oft-repeated speech patterns, and they will generate new language based on these patterns or rules. However, when the student needs help with a particular aspect of grammar, then it makes sense to use more specific directive techniques to help them. This is especially true when the student's first language does not have the same grammar as English, such as making contractions with nouns and verbs in Spanish. We say, I will, or he could, we'd say, he'd. The Spanish doesn't do that. It's very confusing for them. Or the use of gender-specific pronouns. For instance, in Farsi, there's no concept of he and she. There's only one word for that. But generally, our lessons integrate grammatical instruction. Here's an example from a Beginning Ventures ESL book that integrates grammar. The lesson doesn't teach about pronouns as a class of nouns, or how to conjugate the verb to be in all persons and tenses. It only explains the grammar that the student needs to understand the reading and to communicate with the teacher. My own personal experience has been that beginning students just don't have the vocabulary needed to understand grammatically why something is said one way or the other. So I model, but I don't explain. This may change, of course, for more advanced students. I cannot stress enough the importance of repetition and practice in teaching English. It's also true in pronunciation, as you just heard. This goes for grammar practice especially. Repetition is built into the instructional materials. And if you sense that your student needs even more practice, go for it. You can find additional resources on the internet for just about any problem. This example from the Ventures lesson implicitly demonstrates two grammar rules. First, when asking questions, the verb precedes the subject. And second, when starting a sentence with an interjection or an appositive, the word is set off by a comma. Obviously, we don't try to overtly teach these rules at this level. We just model and repeat and rely on the student to pick up on the pattern. These series are created for class situations, and group activities in the instruction book can be easily adapted to a small group or one-to-one teaching. For instance, the instructions in this activity direct the students to ask their classmates, "Are you from Colombia?" You can change this activity and ask your student, "Is your brother from?" Wherever. "Is your friend from?" Or ask your student to ask you about where you are from. Always feel free to adapt any exercise to meet individual or small group needs. In this example from the Challenger Level 3 workbook, the grammar instruction is completely integrated. The main focus of the activity is on sentence structure, but the secondary focus is on punctuation. Here, if you need to remind the student that sentences start with a capital letter, then that's fine, but you don't need at this point to try to teach a full lesson on capitalization. Here again, the grammatical concepts of subject-verb agreement and the use of pronouns are implicitly taught, along with the main focus of sentence structure. Finally, there's an example of how you can integrate grammar if you want. For example, using the active voice. This is primarily a vocabulary activity, but you can encourage the student to create sentences with themselves as the person doing or feeling the action. And you don't need to explain at this point the difference between active and passive voice. We want you to be comfortable knowing that you will not be expected to create your own grammar activities or to delve deeply into the whys and why nots of English usage. If the student asks, then by all means answer. as simply and briefly as you can. Advanced students may need more formal grammar lessons, but these higher level students are not that common. And if you do need more resources for grammar, your coordinator will help you find suitable materials. Don't get me wrong, I love grammar. I read it for pleasure, but it can overwhelm the student. My general rule of thumb is if I understood what the student said, unless it was really a gross error, I let it go. And I congratulate them on their generating new language. Any questions, any comments, concerns? Are you listening? Come on, ask me. Okay. All right, good, good.
Hopefully that means it's clear.
Hopefully.
Okay. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is talk about reading instruction. And that'll take up the rest of our time tonight.
Right. So this is a long one, but you know that this is the last one. So
Wait just a second. I goofed up.
I'm
here a
waiting.
little.
I'm waiting.
Yeah, I forgot to click that one out. So couldn't get to the right slides.
Okay.
All right, here we go.
Great. So far in the workshop, we focused on lessons from the Ventures and Challengers series. And you saw how listening, speaking, vocabulary, the dreaded grammar, reading and writing are all integrated into the lessons. And now we're going to talk more specifically about the components of reading instruction and show you teaching techniques you can use along with your books to expand and reinforce your lessons based on your individual students' needs. Reading is the process of deriving meaning from text by converting the symbols that we see into words and sentences that communicate something to us automatically and accurately. It is a multifaceted and interactive process. Skilled readers use strategies based on 4 basic skill sets. Alphabetics is a term used to describe reading skills needed to decode words effectively. The body of words used in a particular language is its vocabulary. Fluency is the ability to read words quickly, accurately, and with expression. Lastly, comprehension is the ability to interact with and bring meaning to text. Both basic literacy and ESL students may need help with one or more of these components. Depending on the student, a tutor may emphasize one component more than others, but good reading instructions will work to develop all 4. Reading is based on the understanding that letters and letter combinations represent the sounds of spoken language. Alphabetic skills involving the ability to recognize that a spoken word consists of a sequence of individual sounds are fundamental to reading and understanding text.
When we read, we use a collection of techniques to decode the written word. This list begins with using the very smallest parts of a word to figure out its meaning and moves through other ways of decoding, ending with the broadest technique, which is using context clues. We'll give examples of how to teach using all of these. Which ones you'll need and want to use the most will depend upon your particular student. This slide shows the first chart in the Laubach Way to Reading series, and it's an excellent tool for teaching phonics to a beginning reader, a non-reader. You'll see that this is the same method we demonstrated with the Russian chart at the beginning of the workshop. It demonstrates how you can sit down with someone who cannot read at all and doesn't read English and help them get started. If you're in person, you'd use your finger to guide the student through the chart, and you'd use your pointer if you're teaching remotely. Would somebody like to be my student for this chart? Anybody?
I can.
Okay, that's Emily.
Mhm.
Okay. All right, just say what I tell you to say.
Okay.
All right. This is a bird with a long tail and a round body. Say bird.
Bird.
This looks like a bird with a long tail and a round body. Say bird.
Bird.
This is the word bird. Read bird.
Bird.
Bird begins with the sound b. Say b.
B.
Again.
B.
Again.
B.
Again.
B.
The sound of this letter is b. The name of this letter is B. Say B.
B.
Again.
B.
And what's this? What's the sound of this letter?
B.
And what's the name of this letter?
B.
Very good. Okay, so we'd go on down the chart doing the same thing until we're finished. And the Laubach Teachers Edition has explicit directions and scripts for you to use. So it's all right there, even with pictures on where to point. All right, so let's go to the next slide. And the basic techniques we demonstrated using this chart can be used to teach other kinds of material at all levels. There are some important elements to keep in mind. While you're working with your student, be sure you move consistently from left to right. Notice when I did this line, I did not move back and forth. I just went across because some students have tracking problems. So that can really mess them up. Remember that adults learn well by association. The pictures are a good memory device. And in the Laubach series, there's obviously a very clear picture symbol association, which helps with memory. This approach is multisensory. The student sees, hears, says, and later will write something all at once. And that also reinforces learning. So whenever you can use more than one sense at the same time, that's a good thing. Say read whenever you can. When I had her read bird, I said read. I didn't say. You want to do that because it emphasizes that your student is actually reading. I asked a direct question. What is the sound of this letter? What is the name of this letter? I did not say the sound of this letter is fill in the blank. That's an indirect question like that can be confusing for students, and it's harder for them to answer. So use direct questions. If your student makes a mistake, go back to the known. In this case, the known would be the pictures. If we were doing this, if we were doing the story that went with this, like we did with the Russian, going back to the known was going back to the chart and also maybe the picture when we were reading the story. Be consistent. Use the same words each time to elicit a response, and as few words as possible, so the student doesn't need to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what it is you're asking them to do and can concentrate on what the response should be. Give simple, honest praise often. Good, that's great, you got it. In the beginning, you might start with material a little easier than your student's real level. This provides review and gives your student confidence. You can do this. Look how much you already know. And please remember, as we said in the pronunciation section, to make sure you're making and teaching your sounds correctly without adding vowel sounds.
This is another example of phonics-based material, this time using a page from the Voyager series. In this example, after you introduce the small and capital B at the top, your student identifies things in the picture that begin with B. You write down the words, read them, and ask your student to read them and then write them. Your student chooses a keyword to help remember the letter and its sound. You can use this same process even without this book. The Voyager series is appropriate to use with a student who's more advanced. As you can see, this lesson is not structured. Plus, more is covered in each lesson. Writing is emphasized and the series is more learner-driven. For a true non-reader, the material on the previous slide, the Laubach method, might be better.
A word pattern is a consistent letter or sound pattern that students can use to identify or create new words. The column on the left is an example of the at word family. By adding different beginning sounds, students can create many words in that family. You can also use patterns to show phonics principles. For example, the silent E, how E affects the sounds of the vowels. You can practice substituting different vowel sounds into a word to create new words, like in the last column. Use this strategy to introduce words that your student will see before they begin reading. This will help your student read the piece more fluently. After reading, you can do different activities to reinforce new word patterns. There are hands-on activities that you can demonstrate and practice with. For example, the at, you could write at on an index card. That was the at family was in the previous slide. And then put cards in front of the at. So you could have a B card and a C card and an R card that you put in front of the at. And then you can make word slides like this. And this one happens to be one that you can use all 5 vowels. The vertical one on the slide is another example. And it's funny, but some students do better with the horizontal ones and some students do better with the vertical ones. So you can do either or both. Let's see, next slide. As students advance, recognizing word parts help them decode longer, more complex words. Understanding root words, prefixes, suffixes, compound words, and the difference between plurals and possessives also helps with word meanings. This supports both vocabulary development and comprehension. These hands-on methods are great for word parts practice. This is a little puzzle and they are cut so that they only fit if you put them together correctly. They're all cut differently. So success is guaranteed.
And those word parts is part of your tutor information booklet. So don't think you have to figure this out on your own. It's in there for you. Sight words are commonly used words that readers are taught to recognize immediately when they see them. They're learned as complete units. You use the shape of the word, the length, the specific letter combinations, or other clues to recognize sight words. Some examples of frequently used sight words are shown on this slide. Some words can't be easily sounded out phonetically, such as the numbers 1 or 2, and really have to be taught as sight words. Teach sight words from a passage before your student reads it by writing them down, reading them to the student, and then having the student read the words. Flashcards are one of the best ways to practice sight words after reading. Practice new, frequently used words until they become sight words. It really makes your student feel successful when they know these sight words. It's a tangible measure of progress and a great motivator when your student sees the list of known sight words growing in that pile of flashcards. To use context clues effectively, students must recognize and understand enough of the rest of the words to help them with the words they don't know. Here's a challenging example. I need a volunteer to read the first sentence on the slide, inserting the word that belongs in the blank. Anyone? Please unmute yourself. Oh, come on.
Ursula unmuted herself.
Thank you, Ursula. Go ahead.
Cindy wants to grow violets in her
Perfect.
garden.
Yay.
Continue.
Yeah. Okay, I need another volunteer for the second sentence.
Think about the fact that the first one could have been vegetables also.
That would probably be better than violets, but I did happen to like violets, but
Yeah,
let's
that
go with
was good.
vegetables.
I like that too.
I can go.
Good.
Okay, go.
With the price of vegetables going higher, people are trying to grow their own.
Yes,
Good.
yeah. I mean, you know, the price of violets going up would be really amazing too, but vegetables is better for this example.
Well, I have Mother's Day on my mind.
There you
Happy
go.
Mother's Day, everyone.
Yeah.
You too.
Yes. So there we go. So there's how we use context clues effectively. Both violets and vegetables.
Right. They did a good job. Okay, as students advance and become independent readers, the strategies that help them apply the decoding skills that we've been discussing become more automatic. Good readers scan text to understand the overall meaning, and then they use context clues to figure out what a word might mean. They may use visual clues, such as the beginning letter of the word or the shape and length of the word, to help decode the word quickly. This is similar to how we recognize street names from a distance. As you're driving along looking for an unfamiliar street, and you'll see a sign coming up and you'll say, no, can't be that one, the word's too long or too short, something like that. So, you know, looking at a distance, same kind of a thing. They may sound out words and see if it matches a word they know. They might think about whether a word follows regular rules. If it doesn't, then they might try different vowel sounds to see whether that helps them to decode the word. They might substitute a word they might substitute in their head a different word that makes sense and write down the new word for looking up later and just continue reading. Good readers go through these strategies fairly quickly so as not to disrupt reading fluency. Introduce these steps to your student and practice in multiple lessons after reading. They'll become more confident and enjoy reading more when they can apply these strategies on their own.
Good alphabetic skills help students to read new words that they will understand if the words exist in their listening vocabulary. The more words students know, the better they understand what they read. But they will have trouble reading and understanding words that aren't part of their oral vocabulary and will need to use other strategies, such as context for those words. For ESL students, vocabulary development creates a bridge between English and knowledge of their own language. Building vocabulary words, we know the meaning of when we hear, say, read, and write them, is an essential skill for creating independent readers.
And of course, we already talked about vocabulary in the context of the textbooks, but this will just add a little bit more to it. Here's some general guidelines for vocabulary instruction. First, identify and pre-teach unfamiliar words that your student needs to know before reading the text. Second, repeat the vocabulary word often, at least 5 times. Your student will learn a new word better if they practice both speaking and writing it. Next, general vocabulary instruction should be both broad and deep. In other words, work to expand the size or breadth of your students' vocabulary and improve the depth of their understanding. Depth involves teaching nuanced differences in the meaning of words, like cheap and inexpensive, or take and bring, and explain different word meanings within specific contexts. For example, words like pool, stand, and racket. Finally, students need to know 3 word learning strategies: how to use common prefixes and suffixes, how to use context clues, and how to use a dictionary.
So when would you do a vocabulary instruction? Probably both before, during, and after reading, because you use different strategies in each of these stages. Before reading is when you should preview lesson text to identify words your student may not know. As you saw when we discussed vocabulary earlier, the books that we showed you have already done this step for you. But if you're using other materials, you may need to do this step yourself. Then pre-teach these words using direct instruction before your student reads, as we showed you with the Challenger book. Limit new vocabulary words in a lesson to a manageable number. 5 is a good number for a beginning student, and up to 10 for intermediate and advanced, because this is hard work. During reading, you and your student can further study the pre-taught vocabulary, as well as any additional unknown words that crop up. Except when practicing fluency, you should stop during reading to provide a definition when needed. This helps your student comprehend the text. And then after reading, provide activities to practice with the new vocabulary. Keep in mind not to use any activities in one lesson where you may overwhelm your student. There are many, many fun ways to help your student practice and expand their vocabulary. Your handout has activities such as word charts, word builder, word matrix that can add variety to your lessons. Off-the-shelf games can also be a lot of fun and will add more variety, although you may have to adapt them a bit for virtual lessons. Games like Taboo and Password are great vocabulary builders. There are many vocabulary building games online that you can use with your student, or they can use on their own. You can also search Google Images on the fly using your phone or computer to find an image of a particular word or concept that's difficult to understand or explain. Words such as jumper used as a piece of clothing, or the word rust. Just think about that word rust for a moment and how you would try to explain it without actually seeing it.
A picture dictionary is helpful not only for building vocabulary, but also for developing a dialogue and for communicating with your student. So this helps answer that question about how does my student know what I'm talking about? Use picture dictionaries. They're really good.
Oh, they're great.
You can use the dictionary to illustrate words or issues or topics that come up during a lesson. This is the new Oxford Picture Dictionary, and it illustrates the meaning of over 2,400 useful vocabulary words in the context of everyday living. It's great for teaching word categories because of its layout. And the Literacy Council has many copies of the dictionary for you to borrow, but it's such a valuable resource that we find that a lot of tutors and students buy their own, just so they always have it.
Yes, and indeed I have bought my own. Fluent reading feels and sounds like conversation. This helps us to make connections between our listening vocabulary and the written text. Fluent reading is supported by good alphabetic skills and a broad and deep vocabulary. When we read fluently, we can concentrate on understanding what we're reading rather than on the smaller pieces of the language. In the pre-workshop, you learned that fluency has 3 components: speed, accuracy, and expressiveness. When reading aloud, fluent readers read in phrases and add expression and intonation. Stress, rhythm, and intonation are all parts of expressiveness. When someone reads aloud fluently, it sounds very much like ordinary speech.
Fluency improves comprehension in 2 ways. First, fluent readers recognize words automatically without thinking about them. This allows them to focus on comprehending the text. Second, fluent reading creates proper emphasis, rhythm, and inflection, which may not be apparent in printed text. This also improves comprehension. Reading aloud makes it easy for students to hear themselves getting better. This increases their self-confidence as readers. So we teach fluency by reading aloud activities. Guided oral reading is repetitive reading with guidance from a teacher or coach. Research shows Research shows that guided oral reading is the best way to improve fluency. In general, a teacher, parent, or peer reads a passage aloud, modeling fluent reading. Then students reread the text, sometimes several times. The text should be at the student's independent reading level. Usually reading the same text 4 times is sufficient.
Okay, we'll look at 4 of these techniques to give you an idea of what you can do to help your student become a fluent reader. Choosing material that is of interest to your student will encourage them to read. Choose articles on sports, gardening, or anything that relates to your student's life. For a mother who wants to read to her child, use children's books. Modeled reading is basically reading aloud. When parents read to their children, they are modeling reading. Students should have a copy of what you're reading so that they can follow along with their eyes. The text can be at a slightly higher level than you would normally use, but students still need to be able to follow along easily. In echo reading, you will read each sentence, modeling proper pace and phrasing, then the student reads after you until you have read the entire passage. Repeat the process from the beginning, gradually increasing the pace and the amount of text modeled at one time as the student improves. Repeat until the student can read the passage independently. Choral reading is reading aloud in unison with students. Because your student is reading with you, the passage should be at the student's independent reading level. During choral reading, when the student is reading confidently, the tutor can stop reading and listen, helping if necessary. In duet reading, the 4th technique, the tutor and student read at the same time, which is similar to choral reading, but you will use material that is new to the student and is a bit above their current reading level. Duet reading helps students improve fluency and vocabulary by developing the ability to recognize words automatically rather than focusing on decoding. It helps them read faster and with more confidence. It can be used with students who have some reading ability, but who are reading hesitantly, word by word, or with no expression. We're going to do some duet reading together. So, I want you to begin reading the next slide aloud with Caroline, even though you're muted, starting with the title as soon as we show the slide. Don't try to study or analyze the text when you see it, just start reading. Don't get discouraged if you can't keep up.
Okay, here we go. As soon as you see it, we'll start with the title, okay? Facial expressions and head movements. Can you tell how someone feels about you by reading body language? Authorities claim you can, from the look of scorn, however fleeting, to the subtle nods and bright eyes that say someone is receptive to your thoughts. Katie, 17, says, "My friend's mother doesn't like me. I know she doesn't. I asked Katie why she thought this. Well, for one thing, she doesn't look at me when I talk to her," Katie explained. "She looks away toward the door or across the room as though she wants to escape. And sometimes she looks at me as if to say, 'You look funny in those clothes.' I guess it's the way her eyes look cold and her lips are pressed together. She doesn't need to say one negative word to me." The mother's body language had sent a message loud and clear. Okay, what was that like? How did you feel about that? Did you find it a little bit confusing or frustrating?
I was shocked to see it looked like Dutch.
I
heard you reading and then I was like, wait.
Well, it is phonetic, which you may have realized as you went along. Yeah. Hopefully you did try to read this aloud with me. I think not at a really hurried pace, a good clip, And I did that because you all are readers. You know, with a student, I would have gone a little bit more slowly, but not belaboring the slow speed, because you want them to try to keep up. So you would find that this is tiring, and you probably found it kind of hard to keep up, but you probably found that as you went along, you got a little better at reading it. You caught on to it. When we do this in person as a group, you can tell the difference between the beginning and the end by listening to the class, and the person who's presenting it usually has to start reading it faster because the group is getting too good at it. So, but you really it takes a lot of concentration. So of course, with a student, you'll use correctly spelled material. But again, we were just trying to put you in the shoes of the student, give you the student's perspective of what it's like to do a duet reading exercise and try to keep up with it. Does anybody have any other comment about this? Hopefully it was kind of fun for you. Okay, here's another fun one.
Okay, we've got another fun activity. So this activity is going to emphasize how emotion and meaning are conveyed in fluent reading. This exercise is called Say It Like You Mean It, and it's going to show you guys how meaning changes depending on what you emphasize when you read a sentence. The sentence on the box on the slide is a good one for this kind of activity. So I want someone to read, can I have a volunteer to read the first 4 sentences, really emphasizing the word in the blue?
Emily said she'd do it.
Okay, Emily, go.
I never said you hit my car. I never said you hit my car. I never said you hit my car. I never said you hit my car.
Great, great. Really, the emphasis really makes a difference, doesn't it?
Okay, that's fun to do.
Yeah.
Okay. There are 2 basic fluency rules. First, you should practice fluency after your student has already read the passage and you've checked for comprehension. At that point, your student has reviewed the vocabulary several times and is more familiar with the passage. This sets them up for success. The exception to this is with duet reading, when they're reading text that they've never seen before. Second, don't practice other things at the same time. Don't ask any comprehension questions or ask your student to stop and decode a word. Reading fluently takes all of a student's concentration. Comprehension usually improves with more fluency, but you're not working on fluency and comprehension at the same time. Comprehension is the 4th component of reading instruction at the top of the tree. Let's say we know the letters and sounds, we know the words, and we read smoothly. That doesn't necessarily mean we understood what we just read. By learning and using comprehension strategies, your student will become a better and more confident reader. The first principle of reading comprehension is that we read to understand. Depending on what the purpose is and whether the text is fiction, nonfiction, or poetry, we use different strategies to help build understanding. Alphabetics, vocabulary, and fluency are important skills, but for good comprehension, a student needs to have enough background knowledge and life experience to establish a context. Without context, students will not be engaged. Teaching comprehension is important for both basic literacy students who already speak English and for ESL students who are learning English. Both ESL students, some ESL students may have been taught to read, pronounce, and spell English words, but they may not really understand the meaning of what they're reading. And then one of our basic literacy students was able to read words from a 5th grade list, but was not able to answer any comprehension questions about a story written at a 2nd grade level. These are examples of students who need help with comprehension.
When using these comprehension strategies that you saw in the pre-workshop, ask questions that will show you for sure whether your student understands or not. For example, if you ask, do you understand this paragraph? I'm convinced that students are going to say yes, just to please you, but you don't really know if they do. If you ask instead, how do you think Susie felt? The student might not answer because they didn't understand the text, or especially for an ESL student, they might not understand the question. Maybe they didn't understand the word felt, or might not have the vocabulary to respond. So then you need to ask in a different way. Don't just reword the question. What were her feelings? Now the student is embarrassed twice by not being able to answer. It's better to ask in a way that gives them some support, like asking in an either or question. Do you think Susie was happy or sad? This way, you're giving the student support by helping them to understand what feelings means, and also providing 2 vocabulary words that they might be searching for. Or ask a simple yes/no question. Do you think Susie was happy? Basically, when you don't get an answer from an open-ended question, make sure the follow-up question is more direct and is easier to answer. Let's review some key skills introduced in the pre-workshop that support comprehension. Being able to identify the main idea and make decisions about which details are important and which are not helps comprehension. All level of students use sequences in their everyday lives. They may follow a recipe or a procedure at work. Teaching words like before, next, or after will help them get events in the proper order, and that leads to better understanding. Understanding the relationship between cause and effect helps students identify main ideas in news articles, history books, and biographies, as well as fiction. This requires knowledge of words such as before, then, afterwards, because, and since, as well as understanding how these words change the overall meaning. The ability to compare, looking at how things are the same, and to contrast, looking at how things are different, usually go together. For example, when you are shopping and want to choose between 2 products, you compare features while you contrast prices. Additionally, knowing how to tell fact from opinion is a critical skill for accurately understanding information. Finally, good readers know how to make inferences and draw conclusions as they read. Ask questions that encourage the student to think outside of the text or read between the lines, and to draw on their own past experiences and knowledge as a strategy to improve comprehension skills.
Directed silent reading is an activity that involves asking a question ahead of time, so your student is looking for the answer as he reads. This technique can be used at any time with any text your student is reading, and no matter what their reading level. The example here is very simple beginning level material. When a student has trouble understanding what they're reading, it can be helpful to use very simple material below their reading level, or work on comprehension at the end of a lesson after you know that they can comfortably read all the words. So I'd like to demonstrate this strategy using the example on the slide, and I need a volunteer to be a student who would like to do that. I can't see many of the people.
I know.
I'll do it.
Okay, Janet. Okay, great. All right, so the first sentence on the slide tells what Anne gives to Bob. Please read the sentence aloud.
Anne gives a bird to Bob.
Good. Okay, the next sentence tells what she gives to Cal. Please read that aloud.
She gives a cup to Cal.
Now read the next 3 sentences to yourself to find out what Anne gives to the other people. What does she give to Dan?
A dish.
What does she give to Ed?
An egg,
What does she give to Fran?
a fish.
Good. So I asked her to read silently to find the answer to the question. I asked the question ahead of time. Now, if this were a real lesson, then I would have asked her to read the whole paragraph aloud. And if your students, some students have a lot of trouble reading silently, they just can't. And if that's the case, then just do the whole thing aloud. You know, have them read those last 3 sentences aloud and then ask them the questions. So it works either way. Okay, so now we're going to show you another technique called Think Aloud. And this is a great tool for explicit instruction. In a Think Aloud, you read a short passage to your student and then tell the student what you're thinking while showing different reading comprehension strategies. These strategies might include asking questions, predicting or finding information, or making inferences. The Think Aloud technique allows students to see the mental strategies a good reader uses. Before we demonstrate this for you, let's look at the 4 steps of the Think Aloud. Step 1 is to tell the student, we're going to read a story and I will teach you about asking questions, predicting, and making inferences to let you know what I'm thinking as we read the story, by letting you know what I'm thinking as we read the story. Step 2 is to set the purpose for reading and be clear about it with your student. For example, you might say this story is fiction, meaning that it's not real, so we are reading just for pleasure. Step 3 is to read the story or article and model the strategies you want to teach by stopping during the reading and thinking out loud. It's important to plan for when you'll stop and what you'll say. And it's okay and even preferred to show that the thinking process is not perfect. For example, you might make predictions that are wrong. The last step is to discuss which strategies you used. If it's a longer reading selection, pick a good stopping point to review the strategies used so far and then continue reading. Ask your student if they can think of other things they've read where that strategy would be useful. As we demonstrate the Think Aloud technique, listen for the strategies used to teach specific skills. We will use a very simple story for the demonstration.
Okay. Imagine you're eavesdropping on a session with my basic literacy student who is fluent in English. I'm thinking aloud to model for my student. First, how to determine my purpose for reading. So I say to the student, the title of this story, Bob is Late, tells me what happens to Bob. He is late for something. The picture shows a crowded traffic situation. This makes me think that Bob might be late for an appointment. As I read, I hope to find out why he's late. Was he late because of the traffic? Well, Bob woke up at 9 o'clock. He was late for his first job. He hoped Mr. Jones would not fire him. Bob got a ride with a friend named Eddie. His friend Eddie did not have a job yet. Eddie said to Bob, so Mr. Jones is going to fire you? So after reading these paragraphs, I think to myself, so Bob isn't late for an appointment, he's late for work. The story says he woke up at 9 o'clock, which means he probably wakes up earlier than this most of the time. He must have slept in. Wow. I see that Bob might get fired if he's late for work. From my own experience, I know that you can get in trouble for being late, but this seems pretty extreme. Maybe Bob just worries a lot. So Eddie thinks that Bob might get fired too. Seems like that Bob might have a good reason to be worried. Maybe something else is going on. Maybe this isn't the first time Bob has been late. I'll keep reading to learn more. I hope not, said Bob. I hate the job, but I need the money. If I had a lot of money, I would quit. Well, after reading this paragraph, I might think to myself, this story is making a little more sense now. Bob clearly doesn't like his job. He might even hope to get fired. I know that when someone doesn't like a job, they usually don't do it as well as someone who does. Maybe he doesn't do his job very well. If you get fired, let me know, says Eddie. Mike is going to the park with me at 10 o'clock. You can go with us if you do get fired. Now I think to myself, this is really interesting. It seems that Eddie doesn't take getting fired very seriously. I wonder how Bob feels about going to work instead of going to the park with his friends. He probably wishes he could go with them.
Oops. Shoot.
Right. Mr. Jones did fire Bob, so Bob went to the park with his Eddie and Mike. So after reading this last paragraph, I would think to myself, Bob really did get fired. This is what happens when someone is late for work too many times. But I still think this is maybe an extreme reaction. It's likely there are other causes as well. The story said that Bob doesn't like his job. Maybe he wasn't a good employee. The story isn't very clear on this. Bob knew his friends were going to the park. I'm sure he felt that would be a lot more fun than going to work. The end.
This simple story had several opportunities to develop reading comprehension skills. For example, one inference that you could draw early on in the story is that Bob and Eddie were both quite young and inexperienced. This text would also be fairly easy to summarize since the cause and effect is very linear. Also, for a beginning reader, this text provides a good opportunity for summarizing. So in this single think aloud activity, we modeled several comprehension strategies, including setting a purpose, asking questions, making predictions, summarizing, and making inferences. The key purpose for this topic has been to show you ways that you can integrate all four components of reading to help your student become an independent reader. Think about what you, as a good reader, already do before, during, and after reading. Walk through these questions to guide your student and use other strategies that we've talked about that good readers use automatically to understand what they're reading.
Do you have any questions? Which technique did you think you liked the best?
Any?
They all scared you.
Yeah.
They shouldn't. They're all very easy to use.
Yep. And they work. And again, your books will have things in them for you to follow. These are just additional things you can do along with the books if your student needs more help or you need to do something just, you know, that perhaps more interesting to them, that sort of thing. So, okay. Well, if there aren't any questions, I think we're through for the evening, and we ran a little bit late again. Sorry about that. But hopefully we'll see everybody again on Wednesday at same time, same place, and we'll finish up. Everybody have a good weekend. Don't drown in all the rain we're supposed to have.
Yeah, for sure.
Take care, everyone. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Just had a quick question, actually,
Oh,
real quick, if someone
okay.
mind. Sorry. I just
Go
wanted
ahead.
to ask about the duet reading exercise.
Yes.
If you found, like when I was reading along with it, I found that I kind of fell behind, but then caught back up later.
Mhm.
If the student is doing that, do you let that happen?
Yes.
Or would you? Okay.
Yeah, because what happens when you do this technique over a period of time and they practice with it, you don't do it very long at a time, but when you keep doing it, the student starts learning to look ahead so that they can keep up. It
Okay.
gives them that skill of reading ahead a little bit.
Okay.
So yes, as long as they just don't completely flounder. And if you look in the tutor information book, there's more detail about how this works and why it works and how to do it.
Okay. That sounds
Okay.
good. Well,
Great.
thank you very much. I'll see you
You're
next week.
welcome. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for driving the slides.
You're welcome.
Very much. That's a long one, boy. You guys really did a great job on that too. I know it's late and it's long.
Yeah.
Well, but it's the last one. That's why I was telling them. Don't worry.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, for sure.
I was thinking that as I was looking at that today, I guess we have it divided up kind of funny. And I think we might relook at that. We change places more often than we really need to. There were times, when I would just do one and you do one and
then you do more and then
yeah, I think maybe it might make more sense in a lot of cases if we did them in larger blocks though, instead of switching back and forth, but I didn't want to change it at the last minute. So.
That's fine. That's fine. And and I had looked at it this afternoon and I was like, oh, okay. She put it this way. I'm fine.
Well, I did it that way because that's the way it was. I just substituted our name.